The way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end of on the underside at the tip of each finger was the little suction cups. Very fine line, very fine lips. There was no teeth. The ears, there was only 2 small orifices on each side of the head. And she said, I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. I've never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life.
When we take into account that the universe is nearly 14 billion years old and Earth has only been around for a third of that time, it seems logical to assume that many older species could be more advanced and have technological capabilities well beyond our imagination. That considered, along with the perfect habitable qualities that Earth possesses, makes our planet an ideal target for advanced intelligent life to seek out and want to explore. But if there is a more advanced and intelligent life looking to explore other planets, what would be their motivation? Would it be simply for exploratory and educational purposes, to observe and gather data? Could it be to assist and guide the human race in order to help us grow, achieve greatness, and avoid cataclysmic events and self-destruction? Could they be seeking refuge from a dying planet or solar system, in which case their intentions may be survival or colonization? The motives for advanced life visiting our planet may be all these things or none of them, and we also must consider that different entities may have different motivations and agendas. In this documentary, we're going to examine the most prolific reported encounters from the most often described extraterrestrial entities that may be visiting our planet. The Greys. As we we go over these encounters, we will discuss the possibility of their intentions and potential threat or advantages they may provide humanity. Prior to the termination of Project Blue Book, a U.S. Air Force program created to investigate the UFO phenomenon and headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base from 1947 to 1969, there were a total of 12,618 reported sightings. Of these reported sightings, many were investigated and cleared, but 701 remain unidentified to this day. After its termination, the public message and official stance from the government was laid out with these three specific points. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the U.S. Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. Two, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the U.S. Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. Three, there has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. While all UFOologists will concede that it is impossible for all reported alien sightings and encounters to be authentic and truthful, they cannot help but believe that the government clearly knows more than they divulge. Since 2021, when the government released thousands of previously classified documents, we are starting to see that some claims have moved from conspiracy theories to undeniable facts, confirming what has been said repeatedly by insiders. The U.S. government actively uses tactics to deny and derail the public conversation about the possibility that extraterrestrials are visiting our planet. Of all the reported direct sightings and encounters with alien beings, the most commonly described and categorized since the 1960s are of what have become known as the gray aliens. While there may be some small discrepancies in height, coloration, demeanor, or spacecraft, for the most part these beings, their vessels, and agenda consistently fall in line with the vast majority of encounters that are reported. These extraterrestrials, known as the gray aliens, and also have been referred to as Zeta Reticulans or Roswell Greys, are almost always described by witnesses as typically gray-skinned humanoid beings. The average height reported of these beings are usually between 3 to 4 feet tall, and the shape of their bodies are described as being thin and elongated, with a small chest, and their bodies lacking or completely devoid of muscular definition, allowing the ability for their skeletal structure to be visible. Their legs are commonly depicted as being short and proportioned differently than we are used to with the human form. Another interesting note is that these extraterrestrials have also been reported to be jointed differently than humans. The appearance of these beings are similar to humans. The features of these beings are very reduced and in some cases completely lacking. External protruding human body parts such as the nose, ears, lips, and sexual organs are not found on these beings. In visual depictions of the Greys, they are almost always shown with very large, opaque black eyes, which are frequently described as shorter than the average adult humans. They are also depicted as having unusually large heads in proportion to their bodies, with no visible hair on the body, and sometimes small openings or orifices for ears, nostrils, and mouths. Because of the many similarities in appearance to humans, some ufologists have wondered if it is possible Greys are related to humans and even considered that they could be time travelers from thousands of years in the future. This idea may seem extreme, but when we consider the nature of evolution, some of the differences we see in the Greys are things that scientists have speculated could likely change in the human form as we continue to evolve over the centuries. Another possibility that experts in the field of ufology have speculated on are that these beings may be wearing skin-tight suits that serve as protection against potentially harmful elements in the Earth's environment. This too is also a plausible theory when we take into consideration that our moon and the planets in our solar system have conditions that could not sustain human life. So astronauts must wear protective suits in order to survive space travel. If these entities are wearing suits, then it's entirely possible that the beings we have come to know as the Greys may not be gray at all, and could also possess features and anatomy different from what we believe. Spacecraft of the Greys. Of the reported sightings and encounters, gray aliens are most commonly linked to the flying saucer as their spacecraft. While the phenomenon of direct encounters with gray aliens only began in the 1940s, these disc-shaped flying objects have been interpreted as being sporadically recorded since the Middle Ages. One notable story is from January 25, 1878. The Denison Daily News printed an article in which a local farmer, John Martin, reported seeing a large, dark, circular-shaped object resembling a balloon flying at what he described a wonderful speed. Martin said it appeared to be about the size of a saucer from his perspective. This is one of the first uses of the word saucer in association with the UFO. Another early and notable story referencing the flying saucer came on June 24, 1947. This account is the highly publicized sighting by Kenneth Arnold. His story resulted in the popularization of the term flying saucer by U.S. newspapers. Although Arnold never specifically used the term flying saucer, He was quoted at the time as saying that the shape of the objects he saw was like a saucer, disc, or pie plate, and several years later added that he had also said the objects moved like saucers, skipping across water. The flying saucer is most commonly depicted as being metallic in make and color, reflective in such a way that at times it seems to have the ability to disappear or hide in plain sight. Sightings at night almost always report a string of lights around the saucer. And in many cases of abductions and direct contact, there are often reported sightings of a light that seems to burst out of the belly of the spacecraft. When it comes to the movement and capabilities of these spacecrafts, witnesses always report that the UFOs have the ability to move with precision and at speeds unlike any known aircrafts humanity has at its disposal. Notable gray encounters. The Roswell Incident, 1947.
Probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Army Airfield Base, inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed.
He had gone out to the car and brought back in some metallic debris. I believe it was in a box. Well, the most unusual part of this whole thing was what was on the I-beam, on the inner surface of the I-beam. Because as you look at it head on, there appeared to be a type of writing on the mainframe itself. This writing was definitely a purplish violet hue.
Is it possible you might have mistaken it for Russian, Japanese, any other language?
No way.
Mr. Burnett told me that when he was coming back from one of his field trips, he'd run onto a flying saucer that had burst open, and there were 4 beings on the ground.
They had very large heads that were shaped larger on the top, and they kind of tapered down. Not to a real sharp point, but just tapered down where they were thin. And they had very large, oval-shaped or almond-shaped, I guess you could say, black eyes.
That there was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while.
It was the very next morning, some friendly person, probably from Clinton Anderson's office, called us from Washington and said, we understand that you have some information, and we want to assure you that if you release it on this matter, because it's not supposed to be released, it's very possible that your license could be in jeopardy, and so we suggest that you not do it.
The Roswell Incident and the official handling from the military helped to ignite the imagination of UFO believers and conspiracy theories while becoming the most prolific alien encounter known in human history. The Roswell Incident occurred amid the flying saucer craze of 1947. This This all kicked off during the last week of June that year, when a pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing a string of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects flying past Mount Rainier at incredible speeds that he estimated was at a minimum 1,200 miles per hour. This was the first post-World War II sighting in the United States that garnered nationwide news coverage, and it is credited as being the first of the modern era of UFO sightings. Including numerous reported sightings over the next 2 or 3 weeks, Arnold's description of the objects also led to press quickly coin the term that is commonly used today, flying saucer. The William Ware Mac Brazel Incident. On Saturday night, July 5th, 1947, less than 2 weeks after Kenneth Arnold's sighting, rancher William Ware Brazel, who went by the name Mac, made a trip to town from the remote cattle ranch where he worked. The shack at the ranch where he stayed had no telephone, running water, nor electricity, so Brazel was isolated from the outside world and thus completely unaware of the flying saucer phenomenon that had occurred over the previous 10 days. While in town that Saturday night, Brazel began to hear the stories of the flying saucers and descriptions of what they looked like. From these stories, he connected that the strange debris he'd found weeks earlier on his ranch matched the description of the flying discs that were being reported in the news. The debris he had found, tinfoil-like metal, rubber, and thin wooden beams, had all been scattered across a square mile of his ranch. He had thought the debris was highly unusual, but never considered that it could be anything from another planet. After returning to his ranch on Sunday, July 6, Brazel dug out the debris he had cleaned up and loaded it into his truck. The following day, he took it to the sheriff's office in Roswell, who contacted the Roswell Army field to report the evidence they had in their possession. Major Jesse Marcel, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force who had previously helped administer Operation Crossroads, the 1946 atom bomb test, came to meet the sheriff in Brazel to investigate the debris. Brazel took Marcel back to his debris site on his ranch, where they gathered up more pieces of rubber and metal foil. On Tuesday morning, July 8th, Marcel took the material to his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. He reported the finding to General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Field. General Ramey ordered that the material be flown to Fort Worth Army Field immediately. And on July 8, 1947, Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release stating that they had recovered a flying disc. The local newspaper, the Roswell Daily Record, printed the story, but the Army quickly retracted their statement. Since the retraction of the story, the U.S. government has maintained that the debris of the crash was from high-altitude weather balloons that were part of the top-secret military surveillance program, Project Mogul. Project Mogul was said to be carried out from 1947 until early 1949 and was a classified portion of an unclassified project by atmospheric researchers at NYU. This project was conceived by Maurice Ewing, an American geophysicist and oceanographer who had previously researched the deep sound channel in the oceans. He theorized that a similar sound channel existed in the upper atmosphere. He believed that at a certain height, where the air pressure and temperature result in minimal speed of sound, that sound waves would propagate to stay in the channel due to refraction. The project involved arrays of balloons carrying disc microphones and radio transmitters to relay the signals to the ground. According to the military, Project Mogul, sometimes referred to as Operation Mogul, was a top-secret project that involved microphones attached to high-altitude balloons, and that the purpose of this was to gain the ability of long-distance detection of sound waves generated by Soviet atomic bomb tests. While Project Mogul has been the official explanation for the Roswell incident by the U.S. military, more questions than answers remain. The unanswered connection and dismissal of Kenneth Arnold's sighting and the account of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects near Mount Rainier that was reported prior to is often pointed to as more proof of a cover-up. Following the Roswell incidents, reports of threats from military warning citizens not to share experiences publicly came out. These threats adversely affected the ability for those working to investigate what truly happened. While the military's measures stalled investigations, it did not stop the most incredible eyewitness claims that came out. These eyewitness claims reported bodies of extraterrestrials that fit the description of what we now know to be gray aliens being found at the site. They claimed that the government was concealing the bodies of these beings and have gone to extreme measures to study them and the debris while continuing to spread misinformation and attacking the credibility of the eyewitnesses. Although this incident happened nearly 70 years ago, it seems that we are a little closer to knowing the truth about what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. The Barney and Betty Hill abduction case, September 19, 1961. The case of the Barney and Betty Hill abduction was the first widely accepted and publicized case of an alien abduction. Regardless if one is a skeptic or a believer of this encounter, it is undeniable that this story went on to shape the perception of extraterrestrials and popular culture. The Hill abduction ignited an Air Force inquiry that was part of Project Blue Book that investigated UFO sightings across the country. What immediately makes the case of the Hills abduction so intriguing is that they are both quite active, well-known, and respected in their community. So when they came forward with their story, there was little reason to imagine they were not telling the truth. An interracial couple, the Hills, lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was a pragmatic man with an IQ of 140 and worked for the United States Postal Service. He also sat on a local board of the United States Commission of Civil Rights. Betty had a career as a social worker. She handled state child welfare cases, and along with Barney, was active in the local Unitarian congregation. September 19th, 1961, the night of the abduction. After 16 months of marriage, Betty and Barney Hill decided to take a delayed honeymoon trip through Montreal and Niagara Falls. It was a much-needed break for a couple who worked long, hard hours, not only in their careers, but with the church and civil activities. Per the Hills' accounts of the evening, the UFO sighting and abduction happened on the last night of their 3-day trip. The couple stopped at a Vermont diner and had coffee before getting back on the road around 10 p.m. If they pushed through, Barney thought that they could beat the wind and rains from approaching hurricane and arrive safely back at their home in Portsmouth between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Once the couple was back on the road driving home around 10:30 p.m., they noticed a strange light in the sky that caused them some concern. At first they thought it was just a falling star. But soon they realized, unlike a falling star, it grew larger and brighter with each mile. Barney had no concern at first and felt safe assuming it was a satellite. But as the couple continued driving, they began to notice that the light seemed to be possibly mimicking the car's movements while they drove down the winding mountain road. At this point, the light begins to behave in ways that made no sense to the couple. Zigging and zagging, ducking past the moon and behind trees and mountain ranges, only to reappear moments later. It felt to them at times that the light was almost taunting them by moving nearer and then retreating. However odd and unusual the experience had been, the couple was still trying to find a logical explanation for what they were experiencing. They had considered it was likely an illusion created by them driving, and that the car's movement was only making it seem that the light was following or approaching. After a short while, Betty and Barney Hill decided to pull over at a road stop to take a better look and try to understand what they were seeing. Betty had a set of binoculars, and after looking through them, she could immediately see that the white light was really an object spinning in the air, and realized that there was no way that this light was either a satellite or a star. Barney also knew that this was something unusual, and while he tried to convince himself and his wife that maybe it was a commercial plane or military jet, deep down he was concerned about what this could be and why it was seeming to taunt them. The couple got back on the road in hopes that the strange light would retreat, but it didn't. At this point, the Hills were about an hour away from the diner when they saw the object hovered just above the treetops, approximately 100 feet above them. Barney abruptly stopped the car but kept the engine running as he shoved his handgun he had carried for protection beneath the seat into his pocket and rushed into a dark field, leaving Betty in the car. At this point, Barney could not begin to understand what it was they were experiencing. As he looked up at the object, he realized that it was massive, the size of a plane, but it was no plane. This craft was flat and pancake-like, and as he looked upward, he could make out rows of windows, and behind these windows, 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out the craft's windows and seemed to look at him. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of a hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message telling him, "Stay where you are and keep looking." Barney tore the binoculars away from his face and ran back to his car. In near hysterical state, he told Betty, "They're going to capture us." He saw the object again shift its location directly above the vehicle. He drove as fast as he could, telling Betty to look for the object. She rolled down the window and looked up. Almost immediately, the Hills heard a rhythmic series of beeping and buzzing sounds, which they said seemed to bounce off the trunk of their vehicle. The car vibrated and the tingling sensation passed through the Hills' bodies. The Hills said that then they experienced the onset of an altered state of consciousness that left their minds dulled. A second series of beeping and buzzing sounds returned the couple to full consciousness. They found that they had traveled nearly 35 miles, but they had only vague, spotty memories of this section of road. They recalled making a sudden, sharp, unplanned turn, encountering a roadblock, and observed a fiery orb in the road. When they finally got home to Portsmouth at dawn, the couple felt strange and awful. Even though they were home, they were far from relieved. They both described feeling dirty. Barney's shoes were strangely scuffed, and Betty's dress was ripped. They began to realize that there were 2 hours of the drive that neither one of them could remember, and they both felt aware of a puzzling presence. In the weeks and months after, Betty began researching as much as she could about UFO sightings and abductions. She discovered the civilian UFO group, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. She shared her story and also reported the sighting to the Air Force. The couple was worried about the possibility of radiation exposure and the lasting effects it could have. As the years passed, the couple struggled. Betty suffered from disturbing dreams, while Barney developed an ulcer and anxiety. Eventually, the couple sought mental health help and met with Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist and neurologist who specialized in hypnosis, a mainstream technique at the time. Over months of weekly sessions, Simon helped the couple piece together what they now believe happened to them that night. It seems that the vessel had eventually landed on the Hills' car, putting them to sleep. Afterward, gray beings walked them up a long ramp into a large spacecraft nearly the size of their home. Once inside, the Hills were separated. They were each brought into an examination room separately that had curved walls and a large light hanging from the ceiling. Each was asked to climb up on a short metal table, so short in fact that Barney's legs hung over the side. During the examinations, the beings removed Betty and Barney's clothing, plucked strands of their hair, took clippings of their nails, and scraped their skin. Each sample was placed on a clear material, somewhat like a glass slide. Needles connected to long wires probed their heads, arms, legs, and spines. One large needle, around 4 to 6 inches, seemed to be a pregnancy test, which was inserted into Betty's belly. This test left her twisting in pain. Throughout, a being Barney and Betty called the leader watched from the side. Through the hypnosis, Betty recalled some conversations and incidents that were quite peculiar. One of the incidents was when the beings discovered that Barney's teeth could be removed because he had dentures. Later, alone with the leader, Betty asked where the craft had flown. Admitting she knew little of the universe, the being told her, "If you don't know where you are, there wouldn't be any point in me telling you where I am." 4 years after the abduction in 1965, the Hills story was picked up by a Boston newspaper. After that, the quiet couple's story became known around the world. A best-selling book and a movie starring James Earl Jones were made of the upstanding civil servants who had become celebrity abductees. The Hills were not the first to spot a UFO or even the first to report an abduction, but their story did capture the nation's imagination and was so widely publicized that it helped shape how we talk about alien encounters and abductions to this day. While the Air Force's Project Blue Book would ultimately dismiss the story, determining unexplained craft could be explained by natural causes, hinting that the couple hadn't seen a spacecraft at all, but only the planet Jupiter. That said, the NICAP's scientific advisor found their account credible after he cross-examined the couple. For his part, psychiatrist Simon never felt that the Hills had made up their story. He publicly stated on a radio show in the 1970s, "I believe implicitly in the honesty of these people." His conclusion was that Betty had dreamed of the abduction and Barney had absorbed her story, especially since many of the most vivid details matched descriptions of dreams Betty had jotted down after the event. Of course, the other explanation, the one that's hard for most to stomach, is that the abduction actually did occur. Betty and Barney never wavered in their story, and both went to their grave believing what they had uncovered through hypnosis actually happened to them. Like many abductees, the couple never felt false memory or sleep paralysis explained what they experienced. Betty became a known voice in UFO research and claimed she was visited multiple times in the decades to follow. November 5th, 1975, the Travis Walton UFO Incident. The Travis Walton UFO incident was an alleged alien abduction of American forestry worker Travis Walton by a UFO on November 5th, 1975, while he was working in a national forest near Snowflake, Arizona. For 5 days and 6 hours, Walton was missing. After days of searching with scent dogs and helicopters, Walton says he reappeared by the side of a road near Heber, Arizona. The Walton case received mainstream publicity and remains one of the best-known alien abduction stories in the world. In 1978, Walton wrote a book about his abduction entitled The Walton Experience, which was later adapted into the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. Walton, while riding in a truck with 6 of his co-workers, allegedly encountered a saucer-shaped object hovering over the ground approximately 110 feet away, making a high-pitched buzz. Walton claims that when he got out of the truck and approached the object, a beam of light suddenly appeared from the craft and knocked him unconscious. Terrified, the 6 witnesses watched as Walton seemed to be abducted by the spacecraft. Not knowing how to aid Travis, they took off to seek help. Walton claimed that he awoke in a hospital-like room being observed by 3 short beings that matched the description of gray aliens. Terrified for his life, Walton claimed that he fought with these beings until a human wearing a helmet led him into another room, where he blacked out as 3 other humans put a clear plastic mask over his face. Walton has claimed that he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking along a highway 5 days and 6 hours later, with a flying saucer departing above him. Walton has claimed that he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking along a highway 5 days and 6 hours later near Heber, Arizona, with a flying saucer departing above him. As with all major reported UFO sightings and abduction reports, skeptics rush to claim hoax and debunk as quickly as believers rush to accept and believe. Travis Walton case is no different, and it has been subjected to a high amount of scrutiny based on the fact that he remembers very little and that the story seems to be inconsistent at times. Some of the things skeptics were quick to point out as proof of a hoax were that the Navajo County, Arizona Sheriff's Department categorized Walton and his older brother and his mother as longtime students of UFOs. They also go on to say that this is an example of a UFO hoax promoted by a credulous media circus, with the resulting publicity exploited by Walton to make money. One notable UFO researcher, Philip J. Klass, agreed that Walton's story was a hoax, perpetrated for financial gain. He identified many discrepancies in the accounts of Walton and his co-workers. And after investigating the case, Klass claimed that the polygraph tests were poorly administered and that Walton used polygraph countermeasures such as holding his breath, and that Klass uncovered an earlier failed test administered by an examiner who concluded the case involved gross deception. However, on the other hand, a notable UFOologist, Jim Ledwith, said for 5 days the authorities believed that he had been murdered by his co-workers, and then he was returned. All of the co-workers who were there, who saw the spacecraft, they all took polygraph tests, and they all passed except for one, and that one was inconclusive. What is agreed to and accepted by both skeptics and believers is that these polygraph tests were administered. And the truth is, when it comes to polygraph tests, people do try to deceive them all the time. But it seems highly unlikely to imagine 6 of the 7 people corroborating the same story were able to pass the exam. Another skeptic who weighed in was cognitive psychologist Susan Clancy. She proposed that Walton was likely influenced by the NBC television movie The UFO Incident, which aired 2 weeks before his own claimed abduction. She stated that Walton's story shares commonality with all other alien abduction claims that are made after such stories appear in films and on television. When we take into account all of the skeptics who claim Walton's story is a hoax created for financial gain, they too fall victim to the same scrutiny of circumstantial evidence. Each one of the naysayers present an opinion about Walton and his claims based on their interpretation and investigation of the accounts. However, they can provide no hard evidence to support their claims of a hoax. What is left that remains very hard to explain for anyone are 2 things. 1. If Walton made this all up nearly 50 years ago, where was he for the 5 days he was missing, while the sheriff department was convinced he had been murdered and searched for his body using scent dogs? 2. Walton has always stuck by his story, as have his co-workers, who were with him in the night of the abduction. How is it possible that none of the 6 eyewitnesses who backed up his story this entire time, have not come out to cry foul? If Travis Walton's story was all a ruse built for financial gains, each one of the eyewitnesses would have risked much to go along with it, while Walton received the glory and riches, and they got little to nothing in return. Considering the popularity of this case, any one of them could cash in at any time by coming forward and telling the truth about what really happened if it were truly a hoax. The fact of the matter is this. With most cases of alien abductions and UFO encounters, the best we are offered is stories from the abductees and circumstantial evidence in favor of the account. In some of the best cases, we are given multiple eyewitnesses who corroborate our story. But that doesn't stop the naysayers and skeptics. Even in cases with incredible amounts of witness, such as the Phoenix Lights, skeptics refute these claims and work tirelessly to debunk, but also offer only opinion and circumstantial evidence to back up their disbelief. The 3 cases we covered here, Roswell, Betty and Barney Hill, and Travis Walton, are really no different. Even though with the Roswell case we are left with some verifiable hard evidence in the way of debris, we are not able to examine it ourselves and are left with the accounts of the nature of the debris that is described as otherworldly by some witnesses and nothing unusual by our military. The choice is then left up to the individual to decide. If we choose to believe that gray aliens do indeed exist and have visited our planet and had encounters with humans, then the questions are, do they pose a threat, and what have they come for? First, do they pose a threat? While it is undeniable that any individual would likely find an alien encounter to be a terrifying experience, the fact of the matter is that our fear is first likely based on the unknown. This is compounded by fabulous works of science fiction storytelling through books, radio shows, television, and films, where we are presented with more examples of aliens being menacing and murderous creatures than peaceful and intelligent. Along with this, the secrecy, suspicious handling, and deception by world governments to debunk and bury every report of UFOs and alien encounters only lead to more unknowns that perpetuate more fear. If we are to believe in the stories of these three encounters, the simple truth is that the Greys have never posed a threat of violence to humanity. In fact, in the cases of abductions, they return the individuals safely. And after a time, the abductees settle on the idea that the initial terror was connected to the fear of the unknown in the initial moments of the encounter. And when looking back on the experience, the realization is that the species never posed any threat and could have inflicted harm or death at any time. Considering this, it seems highly unlikely at this point that these beings have violent intentions or are a threat to humanity at all. As for the second question, why have they come? For now, the best we can consider is that their interest is likely to be in line with that of our own. Explore and learn. That said, what is worth comparing and considering when trying to understand the motivations of Greys visiting Earth is this. As our technological advancements continue and our abilities to travel to remote planets grow, will we simply remain observers who gather information? Or will we set our sights on planets with ideal conditions for life, gather information slowly in order to fully understand the life that inhabits these planets and the challenges it would take to colonize and take over? I believe that our history holds that answer. Considering the vastness of space and near infinite span of time, it seems an absolute certainty that if intelligent life exists here on Earth, on our planet, that there must be other forms of intelligent life out there as well. Within man's technological history, we have accomplished great feats and are on our way to so much more. Sending humans into space.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Walking on the moon.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Successfully landing a rover on Mars to collect and gather information and insight on our galaxy and its history. These are all incredible achievements. If we have the ability to travel these great distances today, where and potentially when could we go in the not so distant future?